Today, we confront our demons with South African hardcore metal band Lower Hollow. Ashley, Chad, Tristan, and Benjamin. If Battle of the Bands was more like Hunger Games, where you have to send one member into the arena, which member of Lower Hollow would you send and why?
Probably Chad. I'd probably send Chad in. I'm going to say because he's probably got the most experience on gaming. He's also got the most experience on all things sort of like ancient, and he's like an old soul. He likes all the Lord of the Rings stuff, but like he's pretty serious about his love, and he nurtures the school of thought around all that kind of stuff. So I'd probably say someone like that because he's probably got a keen understanding of what it is to, you know, defend himself at a level and kill others, I'm sure, as well.
Chad, what would your main strategy for survival be? Are you a sneak? Are you maybe someone who's tanky? What are you going for?
When it comes to my main strategy, I would probably try to be as friendly as I can to other people to form alliances. So yeah, that would be my strategy, really. I would make them to the other folks and let them do the killing. And yeah, I guess if we had to make another Hunger Games, then I might kill them.
Collaborate until the final kill. I like it.
Absolutely.
Okay, which member would be the most likely to give away your position because they're accidentally singing Somewhere to Belong out loud?
Probably Ethan. And I know he's not here right now, but probably Ethan, just because he strikes me as the one oak in the band who would love to do something like that.
He seems vindictive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he definitely seems vindictive out of the lot of us. Like he would be that guy to, as a joke, just sort of like sell you out, you know?
So we don't invite Ethan unless we need an epic troll.
Absolutely. He's a good oak, but he 100% sell us out like that.
Okay, well, since Bloom and Expire, your members have changed. We are sitting with 4 out of 6 today. Tell me, how did your new lineup come together? How did we get in the same room to make the amazing music that we hear from Lower Hollow?
Wow, okay, yeah. So essentially, at the end of our last tour, 3 of the guys left the band, and that kind of left with Chad and myself. So we're obviously from the original 5-piece lineup, and that put us in a position of obviously having to find new guys. We probably reached out to Tristan at first. Like he'd been in a band, Walk These Skies, and we'd seen them play at our first show when Lower Hollow first got on the scene. And he played our first show with us, and what they did. And he just sort of like, for me, he just kind of stuck out as like someone who could front a band really well. So it was kind of like a first choice, to be honest. We reached out to him. At the time, he was a free agent. So, you know, things with Walk These Skies and his other band kind of went on ice, and he was open to do it and keen to give it a go. And so that had a new vocalist in. And then I think the next part was probably, mind you, the first guy actually to join. We've had such a cuck lineup experience, very honestly. It's such a shit part of the story. But initially, Calvin from Truth and Its Burden was as second guitarist. So he was someone I'd worked with before in the past, when we were still in the throes of things falling apart with Lower Hollow's 3 guys that left. I'd asked him, like, dude, can you step up and walk us through this process? And he was down to help. You know, kind of, he wasn't feeling it at some point. And so obviously we got hold of Benji. Benji got hold of Ethan. And so we became this Iron Maiden-esque kind of three guitarists in a band vibe. And in between all of this, we had Rudy as well. Can't quite tell you where he came. I think he was directly after Tristan, kind of that kind of vibe. We were looking for a bassist, of course, and Rudy signed up for that. Ended up being more on the studio side, not so much the live side. So, and I think that sort of completes where we're at up to this point. You know, I think any band that's been around a long time, and I mean, you could go through the eras of Foo Fighters for argument's sake, or some of the more well-known bands out there. I mean, a lot of bands go through a lot of lineup changes, and it is a shit part of the history, and it obviously looks bad on paper, but it is what it is, and I think if the main trajectory is to move forward, then, you seek out guys who kind of feel that same sentiment for that journey, and so that's kind of where we're at.
How has the sound changed with the addition of these new members?
Well, we've tried, I think, for the most part, to retain certain elements. I mean, it's still, there's a lot of like fast, sort of more punky hardcore kind of things going on that we had on the previous album. I mean, that's more a rhythm thing from the rhythm section with drums. I mean, that's just my style of playing. So those are elements that, as long as I'm behind the kit, they'll always be there. We did kind of strip away some of the sort of like progressive elements, if I can say that. So it's not as like weird timing signatures here and there. Like that's not so much a feature. There might be one or two elements of it, but it's not necessarily been a feature of the new moving forward. Vocals, obviously, that's like straight up front. That's the biggest, difference folks are going to obviously notice. With Estienne, he was way more sort of bottom end aggressive. He had a very rad tone. He had but I mean, it was a dominating sound of what Lower Hollow had as a sound overall, And with where we are now with Tristan, it's more sort of like middle range, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of, I don't know, like Architects and bands like that have a mid-range kind of vocal style, and that's kind of where we are. And it's, which has obviously shaped the guitar tone as well, and the kind of ideas that we would use to kind of more kind of fit that and suit that. But ultimately, weirdly enough, when I first put the call out to start the band, the kind of influences that we were calling forward, were bands that had that kind of vibe, So, obviously at the time, guys that we'd got in their initial Lower Hollow lineup were guys that came forward, you know what I mean? Whereas I think now, with the original kind of intention of what Lower Hollow sound should be, we're definitely more on that path without a question, So, I mean, I'll give it over to Chad, and maybe Tristan also can sort of like elaborate a little bit around, but I think Chad's probably got a better idea to where that also sort of shifted guitar-wise.
Yeah, so when it came to writing this album, well, for Bloom and Expire, for example, our previous guitarist was the one who really did all the songwriting. And he drew a lot of influence from bands like Counterparts, for example. I'm sure any Counterparts fan will recognize those influences on that album. And while there is still that Counterparts influence on this new music, it's the closest band I can compare our new sound to, at least in terms of instruments, is Svalbard. They definitely play a big part in this writing process. And again, as Ash was saying, it falls more along the line of what the original intention for Lower Hollow sound was supposed to be. But yeah, I guess that's all I have to say when it comes to the music side of things. I don't know, Tristan, anything you want to say, Brew? You covered everything. Okay, he thinks I covered everything.
So something that's interesting about you, and you've just touched on it now, is that some musicians like to be shy about their influences, but you guys have made it quite clear. I mean, you've even made a playlist of tracks that inspired this new album. I see that it includes songs from Bring Me the Horizon, Poison the Well, and like Dream State, and a lot of others. Are these songs more general favorites that sort of signify the vibe? Or did you, say, actively engage with them in creating Threnody Songs of Fortitude?
Generally speaking, when you sort of look at the full picture of the album and you listen to that playlist with the intention of kind of like figuring out where certain things came from, the puzzle piece start really sort of building a bigger picture. And you might sort of like hear a little guitar riff that sort of has an inkling towards, I don't know, Svalbard, for argument's sake. You might hear a clean guitar tone that sort of has a similarity to, Poison the Well track that's on there. Or, there's an acoustic track on there that from Sepultura, which is actually from a really fucking old album, Schizophrenia. And that kind of inspired the discussion for us to include a acoustic track in the the new album. You know, I've always wanted to do it, but every time I'd kind of suggested it to previous bands, and I'm talking about Truth and Spirit and my previous band as well, like it always felt like this acoustic thing, this instrumental acoustic wasn't a vibe where like Chad being who he is, and like I say, he's a very old soul that way. Like he welcomed the opportunity to present something. And so, yeah, I think it's a lot of aspects on that playlist that have collectively inspired us. And it's the same for vocals. You know, it might just be a vocal tone thing, you know, where someone feels like super inspired by, I don't know, Ollie Sykes's projection, or the way that he sang a certain kind of thing, the way he phrased something, or whatever it might be, you know. It's certain little things. I mean, we all have influences as musicians when we come and we sort of like bring our style to the table. And I think when you look at a playlist like that, from a writing standpoint, you know, you had like Tristan writing lyrics, contributing vocal ideas, arrangements, things like that. You had Chad writing all the musical aspects of it. You had myself obviously working on drums, you know, producing alongside Chad and getting the whole thing to come together. You had a lot of different minds in this thing, and that playlist was really just a nice way to sort of like show you just how vast that field of influence can be if you allow yourself to experiment and to try things and to take on things that might feel a little bit uncomfortable. But, you know, let's say putting Metallica in the same sentence as, I don't know, a band like Poison the Well. Like, do they fit together? Are they even from the same, you know, generational interest? No, they're not. But like in the right context, you could bring these various ages together to bring about something new and exciting members of this band. And a big part of that is obviously the fact that I'm like 42 years old, and, you know, some of these guys are like 20 years old. I mean, you know, of course there's going to be a huge interest in music that's way different. And so you have a situation where how do we get all these things to marry up and still feel applicable to today's audience, you know? And we all listen to modern music, you know, myself included. Just because I'm 40 doesn't mean I'm listening to like 40 years ago's music. You know what I mean? Like, obviously I am part of what I'm saying. So it's just another way to kind of like show the broad aspect of the band.
I love it. I can hear a lot of the influences in the right doses, which is always a really difficult sort of thing to balance when you're trying to create something that is uniquely yours in a way, or at least distinctive from everything else that's out there. You've mentioned taking a hybrid approach to recording the album at your home studio. Tell me a little bit more about that experience. You touched on it briefly in the last question.
Yeah. So, I mean, from a recording aspect, like a lot of bands now, and I mean, we're seeing it, it's, you know, it's part of modern recording. It's, you know, I mean, it's partly modern recording, and it's partly just maybe perhaps not having the tools available at hand. But you have a lot of bands who are like programming drums and then, you know, recording guitars through DI and then reamping software, that kind of thing. So you have a completely clean product at the end of the day. It's super polished, it's super new, it's super modern. You know, it's like I say, everything's clean. Everything is like to grid, 100%. There's no issues with anything. It's 100% kind of perfect, you know, for all intents and purposes. Obviously, we do use some of the modern approaches, you know, like for argument's sake, like we track live drums. So it's, you know, it's live drums. We do sample replacement on drums and stuff like that. So that's kind of the approach we take. So it's kind of like an augmented sound on drums. It's a little bit of both, you know, so you're getting like live room mics, which are capturing the real essence of what a drum kit sounds like in a live room. But obviously it helps to have clarity on snare and kick and toms and things like that. So we are taking those and sampling those aspects of the drums to kind of give it that real sort of like kick in an album sense, in an album context. And it helps a lot. I mean, on a recording scale, it's more to do with like just, you know, managing bleed over close microphones. So it's kind of, it's really helpful in that. And obviously you're getting an actual player who's playing. So, you know, that there is a sense of real connection with the audio that you're listening to. I mean, most of the music that we've grown to love and appreciate over the decades, you know, from the bands that we've grown up listening to have all done it that way. You know, and then when I speak about hybrid, it's more kind of like we've taken real guitars with cabs. We've recorded real cabs on like rhythm section guitars, but then we've got like DI signals, and we're running amp sims on your cleans and some of the lead parts. So it's kind of like more of like, it's the best of both worlds, kind of using everything, marrying everything together, you know what I mean? Helping to create that sound that really works for us, you know, and then you work it back into a live sound. It's a lot easier to kind of work with, or we found it to be a lot better for us. So, yeah, I think that kind of generally gives the overview of the approach, I suppose.
And then when it comes to ordering the tracks, I see there's a very intentional sequence across even albums. Did you set out that order of things from the writing, from the get-go, or did you finish a few songs and then assemble them into a cohesive concept?
I'll leave this up to Chad. I think he was part of that process of track listing. So let me give that over to him.
Alrighty, yeah. So when it comes to when it came to writing these songs initially, I didn't write a song and think, okay, that should be in this part of the album, you know. For example, one of the tracks on this album, Social Disease, it's the third track on the album, but it was the first song that I wrote. So I actually still wrote the song still during the Bloom and Expire era. The idea for the song came about. Nothing that I ever presented forward until now, but the writing for this already started back then, and the song has changed quite a lot over the last couple of months to a year. But yeah, as for when it comes to writing the songs, we didn't decide right after the songs were written that it should be placed in a certain part of the album. That came after all the songs were written. We kind of sat down with most of them. I think that's what most bands do anyway, is you write a bunch of songs and then you decide what works best. But also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of maybe Tristan can also tell me if I'm incorrect here, but I think a lot of the lyrics for the album also determined where songs would be placed, because the music came first, lyrics came afterwards, and that also sort of helped to shape where it came. I don't know, Tristan, you want to say anything there, Vu?
No. You covered it again.
I've covered it again. Hopefully that answers the question.
If you say that in the case of Social Disease, a song can sort of live for quite a while before everyone else gets to hear it, is there a vault? Like, is there Lamentation Part 2 maybe? How deep does it go?
Yeah, so when it comes to Lamentation, the idea for having Part 1 be over there, I don't know, should I even be speaking about this? Yeah. So when it came to having Lamentation on the album, that's the acoustic track. And we wanted to have a follow-up single, and we thought it would be cool to have Lamentation Part 1 be the acoustic track and then have Part 2 be a single that gets released afterwards. So that the single still feels like it's part of the same group, like it's still from the same era or the same album, I suppose you could say. But just having the light of day that every single should have, if you know what I mean. So yeah, as far as having anything in the vault goes, Lamentation Part 2 is the only song we have stored up. I don't know if the other guys have written anything, but I'm still busy writing that song at the moment. We have nothing else going on behind the scenes in terms of writing as we currently speak.
And when it comes to releasing, so far, I mean, Lower Hollow has released an album a year. So are you setting that standard for yourself as a band, or is that just something that we can really munch on for now while you go through your own process at your own pace?
To be fair, when 3 dudes left the band, you know, the remaining dudes and whoever joined us alongside to continue Lower Hollow, we're pressed up against the ropes. I mean, you're in a rehearsal space and you're trying to figure out like your own sense of self again. You know, it really was quite a rebirth, quite a, you know, discovery of oneself, all that, you know, and then some. And it was just decided, you know what, like we have to just write a new album, you know. So would that have been the normal route to take? Probably not, you know. I know initially we sort of had it in our minds that we would learn the set that we were playing, you know, on tour, you know, and that was going to be the vibe. And we certainly sort of started figuring it out and, you know, finding a way forward with that. We received a lot of backlash around it, you know, for even wanting to try. And that was kind of at that point, we just said, you know what, like, it's going to be better for us to just step away from that. You know, the sound where we want to go would be different regardless. So it's no use holding on to it in such a way, you know. And yeah, so I wouldn't say that we're going to do this every year without trying to be funny. The kind of pressure that you're under to rebuild a band in a short space of time, have a complete new album come out, you know, swinging the way we're trying to do, is not something you feel like you want to do every other year, you know? So we'll probably be a little bit more sort of like patient with the next release, you know, see how things go, see how people receive this one. You know, we're really confident with it, but you know, you could be confident with something, but at the end of the day, until it's out there on the road touring and playing shows and, you know, in venues and people's faces, you don't quite know how it's going to be received. So we want to see how things fare out there. And yeah, I mean, like we definitely, you know, as we sort of touched a little bit on the acoustic track, we do plan on hopefully coming out with a follow-up to that. We're on a very sort of like, let's see how it goes at the moment, you know, in terms of like gauging when the next album comes out. It's hard to say when you haven't quite launched this current one. You know what I mean? It's a weird one.
One thing I'm really curious about is the title track, Threnody. What is the significance and which came first? Did you name the album after the track or vice versa?
Yeah, so the album name Threnody came first. Myself and Ash were sitting there thinking of what we could call the album, something that really not only represents what the songs are about, but kind of just what the band's about, the direction the band's shifted into at the moment. I think I came up with something along the lines of eulogy or something like that, or elegy, one of the two. And then Ash presented the idea to call Threnody forward because it pretty much means the same thing. It's expressing loss or grief, but mainly through songs, not just speaking it out. And we thought that was, I mean, both literally and metaphorically, that sums up what the album's about. So we came up with the idea to call the album Threnody first, and then the song came afterwards. The song really got its name just because of what the lyrics were about. I mean, it's not like I wrote the song, well, the song was written, at least the music side of things, and then we thought, okay, this has to be the title track. The lyrics came afterwards, and that's when we came to that decision.
And then do you take a similar intentional approach to constructing a set? How do you plan out a live performance? I know you try to get across as much as the essence of the live performance in studio, but what makes coming to the show that little bit more special?
Yeah, so I mean, with the live show, obviously, you know, you want to keep energy like really hot for at least first half of the show. A lot of our songs have high speed, I suppose you could say, you know, so you want to keep a crowd engaged. You know, you want to lock them into like, our approach would be like grouping 3 songs together, you know, to keep people engaged rather than sort of like trying to sort of like break the momentum of a show. Set lists can be kind of tricky because, you know, you can approach it from a point of view of like, well, we want to sort of smith this crowd for the first half hour, not first half hour. We only have a half hour set mostly. But the first half of the set, or you could say like, you know, we want to sort of like engage them from a meaningful point of view, you know, like, and so it just really depends. I know for us right now where we are, we're definitely taking the approach of like, let's hit them hard, you know, going in. Let's engage them from that point of view, you know, and then kind of like figure the slower-ish songs towards the tail end of the set, you know. And I guess that's maybe even like how one would approach an album to some degree. You know, some of the best albums have had like, you know, epic endings, you know, especially when it comes to like melodic hardcore and you know, music that we tend to make, you know, or that I know the bands I've been in have kind of always approached things that way, you know, like where you want to sort of like leave people feeling like they've been, you know, I don't know, like an uplifting kind of like outro, I suppose you could say. You want to leave them feeling positive. You want to leave them feeling like they really had a great time, but they want more, you know. But this whole album, has a lot of ebb and flow. There's a lot of clean sections that sort of like bring the dynamics right down, and then it's like straight back in with like heavy something or other, you know? So I think it's quite a well-balanced album. You know, I can honestly say that like there's something here for everybody. I think, you know, if you're into like older metal and you were in that crowd, you'd be stoked. I think if you were into like more modern metalcore and, you know, modern hardcore, you'd be stoked. You know, if you were into some of the black metal stuff that's out there, or sort of post-black metal stuff that's out there, you'd be stoked at some of the elements that we're sort of bringing to what we are. So, yeah.
You guys are going on tour very, very soon, kicking off with Rumors Lounge, then Bailey's and Railways Cafe, onto Robson's and The Burn, then out to Bloom and Cape Town, and ending off strong at Ellington's and Belleville. So who's driving and who controls the playlist?
It be me. So yeah, unfortunately, it's me. Most of these guys either just got their licenses, or don't yet know how to drive. I don't know which of it is for each of them, but yeah. So I own a van, and so we usually travel in the van because it's, you know, a lot of gear that we traipse around the country. We always play on our own gear. That's something that I've always just, you know, from Truth and Its Burden days, I've always just been like, call it raised to believe that you should play on your own gear. It's where you're most comfortable. You know, I'm one of those drummers that, unfortunately for everyone else, brings my own drum kit to the show and plays my own drum kit. I wouldn't expect a guitarist to play on the house guitar, so I don't know why you'd play on the house drum kit. And so, you know, we have a van for that. And unfortunately, it's one of those scenarios where like you really do need to be a bit more of an experienced driver. And, you know, you are playing with people's lives. And, you know, I've got a very hardcore way of approaching touring. And it generally tends to mean we drive home after the last show in Cape Town. We drive home after the last show in Durban, which for most people sounds like suicide. But when you're me and you have 2 kids, driving at night is truly the best time to drive. And so, you know, we often go to Cape Town to visit family, and, you know, that's once or twice a year we do that trip, and it's always overnight. So yeah, like it's kind of been the way that things have gone. If there were guys who had a little bit more experience behind the wheel, you know, had their driver's license for a little bit longer, it'd probably be a little bit more evenly shared out, as it would have been with bands like Truth and Its Burden, where Calvin did a lot of the driving, and we shared those duties quite comfortably. But yeah, unfortunately, they're going to have to keep me awake, and that means they're going to have to listen to my music the entire way. And I think for the most part, they hate most of the music that I listen to, because it's generally like punk rock. So
You have to do the job of introducing them to the classics, Ashley. We need to get them studied up on what has made the scene what it is today. You have to.
yeah, for sure.
They're gonna have fun. They're gonna get into it just over exposure. Just put some classics.
Well, that's the thing. You know, like
They can have the ride back. You can trade.
No, there's no trading. I don't want to listen to the shit they listen to. I don't know how much Nightwish I can stomach. Yeah, like it's hectic. Yeah. Some of these guys are into some weird music. I know Benji, he's a huge Unlucky Morpheus fan. And I must admit, I've tried just so that I can sort of understand the mindset of someone that listens to music like that. And it's hectic. It takes a very trained ear and a trained personality, I think, to enjoy that kind of music. So yeah, they're unfortunately going to have to deal with, you know, the likes of, you know, Unearth and a whole whack of punk bands, a whole whack of like old school bands like Machine Head and Metallica might make a couple of turns on that tour, you know. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff there. I mean, I'll be generous every once in a while. Whoever might sit front seat while I'm driving, they might get a turn to sort of like, you know, figure something out. But no, we're not that bad. Like I am actually generous around that kind of thing. Chad's unfortunately he's thrust some of his shite music onto me a couple times.
As a punk head, How are you feeling about this new sort of generation where punk is very much an influence, but they're mixing it with a whole bunch of other stuff that we wouldn't have thought of in the day?
Oh, look, I mean, when it comes to punk, I've kind of a lot of the stuff that's out there at the moment, if we're speaking from a South African point of view, like it wouldn't necessarily, pique my interest. Like it's not necessarily something that I would like totally be into. I'm more into, skate punk like Mute. I love stuff like Street Dogs, which is a lot more like the old school kind of like Rancid sort of style. I like a lot of those kinds of bands. Satanic Surfers is like a huge band for me, always has been, always will be. No Use for a Name, those kinds of bands. I love some of the old school bands like Stiff Little Fingers, the Descendants, also great bands, So those are more my kind of bands. In terms of the stuff that's out there at the moment, a lot of the stuff is like pop punk. And this is where the age thing is definitely telling. That wasn't a vibe in my time. Like, it wasn't a favorable style of music to enjoy. I'd go as far as to say a lot of bands who veered towards the pop punk era or style of music, they were hated on big time growing up, and I know if any of the members of Tweak are listening, they'll know what that was all about, because, they had many a can hurled at them because dudes just weren't into it, So like you were either on one side of that or you were on the other side. It was very rare that you found someone that was into both those styles of music. And pop punk is it's making its way back. It's kind of never lost its thing. It's just gone through variations. I mean, there are a lot of pop punk bands that, are around at the moment, that are doing quite well. I don't know if Story So Far is still a thing, but their debut release was really cool. I enjoyed that, but then they kind of went on to do other stuff, and I was kind of, don't know how I feel about it. And there's something about the vocal style of pop punk that never really took me, and shook me. Like that was where I was like more into the grittier kind of, punk rock that almost kind of bordered on hardcore punk, I suppose. I was a huge fan of Good Riddance. Am a huge fan of Good Riddance, and those kinds of bands. In terms of the South African stuff that's out there at the moment, like there's not a lot that I would say that I've been exposed to. I've checked some of the video footage of bands like, I think it's 21 Children. I think that's what they're called, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't seen them live yet. But yeah, I mean, they definitely seem to have like a really, really old school kind of, if I think like early Minor Threat kind of Black Flag approach to punk rock, and that's really cool to see how people are taking to that, because I didn't think in a modern time like we're living in right now that sort of thing would take off, but it seems to be doing quite well, and they definitely seem to be well received wherever they're playing. And I stand in the correction here because obviously, like I say, I'm not necessarily attending these shows, but I think a band like Le Focolordi are also kind of on that same trajectory, like playing a little bit more of a way more grittier kind of punk rock and doing quite well at it. So, but you don't see a lot of bands doing the more sort of traditional, I don't know, like skate punk style of punk rock. So it's definitely a different time for South Africa anyway, you don't hear like skate punk bands like ATFN every other day, like whereas the scene I grew up in when I first started going to shows, there were a lot more of those kinds of bands, so yeah, the scene's gone through very, very different incarnations of itself, that's for sure.
Talking about live music, you mentioned about seeing like Le Focolordi live. Does that make or break your impression of a band? Like we can always listen to them on Spotify, but once you see them live, does it give you a deeper look into them, whether or not you're going to root for their success or become a fan or pay no more attention?
I think absolutely. I mean, I'm from an era where the first time you got into a band was actually live, whereas I don't necessarily go to a lot of shows now. I've got 2 kids. I've got a wife, we've been working on this album for over, a fair few months, nearly a year. There's a lot of work that goes into that. Like there's not a lot of time to go and watch bands live. So yeah, now is different for me than what it would have been years ago. But years ago I would have gone and watched a band, and I'd have been like, they're rad, you know, and like you can kind of take in the live performance. Nowadays, it's more kind of like you hear them on Spotify, or you see a video, or, you know, you see some level of footage or something that kind of gives you an indication of what the band's about. But I definitely think that if you can nail your recordings well live, that for me constitutes a great band personally. You know, like there's nothing more frustrating than hearing a crazy good, well-produced release that's on Spotify and then watching this band and like they just don't match up, you know? For me, it just feels like I kind of feel ripped off. If I'm absolutely honest, I kind of feel super ripped off. And I know that you're not going to sound exactly like that because let's be honest, live sound is live sound. But I'm more speaking now to like a level of musicianship, you know? You want to give a close representation, at least from a musical standpoint, a musicianship standpoint, to what your album is. I mean, you know, when you go watch, I don't know, your favorite band, whoever that might be, like the expectation is really that, like, if nothing else, like they played those songs as best as they could and they sounded super close to what the recording sounded like. And especially with modern day live consoles that are out there, you know, consoles, mixing discs and the kind of PA systems that are around nowadays, it's a lot easier to achieve that than it would have been like 10, 15 years ago. Well, 15, 20 years ago, should I rather say. You know, there it was kind of like, it was very, very hit and miss. You know, nowadays, like bands are, you know, some bands are playing live with triggers. They're playing live with, you know, Kemper profiling amps, you know, so like you're able to get like your sound super tight live. So thus your playing should really match up to that. And that's kind of where I'm like, you know, I don't necessarily sort of feel too stoked to support a band that's on that trajectory, I guess. And I think if bands are really honest with themselves, and I'm speaking about other bands, you know, like who are also like looking at their peers perform and stuff like that, I kind of feel that if they're not verbalizing that, they definitely feel that way internally and amongst themselves, you know, in a more sort of closed circuit kind of scenario. Like I'm quite comfortable to say that those things frustrate me, but I bet that they frustrated a lot of people, you know?
Mm-mm. So sometimes even, you know, like the venue can sort of fail the performance as well. You mentioned so many things that contributes to a successful show, and not a lot of venues have that. What's your criteria for a really good live music venue, something that's for the scene? Which local ones can you think of that fit your criteria for that?
Well, I think this stems back to the earlier answer that I gave around, you know, touring and, you know, where I said that we take our own gear. You know, we don't really rely too heavily on a venue in terms of like what we sound like. And that's because we take our own guitar amps, you know, full cabs, as much of the gear that we possibly can take, you know, and, you know, I have my own drums. I bring my own microphones so that, you know, if there's an issue with microphones there's a way to get around that for us. Now, I know that that's not everyone's criteria or it's a privilege to have it. Let me put it that way. And I don't think that that's the same for everybody else. But for us, that's the standard we're trying to perform on. And when I look at a venue, to me personally, if it's a decent sized stage and the PA system physically switches on and works, we're happy to work with that. That's what I look at. So, and I know that to some people, they're like, no, but it has to be this pro venue and this pro desk and this pro, or like, if they don't have it, I'll bring it, you know, like kind of that's my mental headspace around it. Like, you know, and that's why, like, if you look at the some of the places that we're playing, they're not necessarily like the going live venue. Like, that's not important to me. Like, we're a band, we perform, you know, we have the gear that we need that bands should generally have to perform. So you don't need to rely so heavily on what the venue's doing. I mean, if we need lights up, load lights, we go. You know what I mean? Like, we can make a show work the way we'd like our band to be represented. And I think that to me has been something. It's taken a long time to obviously to gather all the resources, and it's taken a long time to gain an understanding of what that is and what that means on a physical level. But that's really the way I look at it now. You know, I don't look at venues and think, you know, oh, you know, if we don't play at this venue, this show's going to be shit. Like, no, like, I don't think that way at all. Like, we've had great shows at, like, I guess you would call them like maybe run down little rat hole kind of venues. And we've We've had shit shows at like what most would deem are like premier venues, you know, and I'm speaking not just of like Lower Hollow, I'm speaking now of Truth and Spurden as well. I've had some amazing shows with Truth and Spurden in some guy's basement, you know, where it was like two powered monitors on speaker stands, and, you know, but again, you know, we're going into those scenarios with our own guitar cabs. So we're not relying on a venue to give us everything. We're going into that venue with almost everything that we need, that you can basically look at the venue and just say, listen, can we just use your PA system to run vocals through? Because our speaker cabs can run what we need to run. You know, we can drive everything from our side. If you guys can just help lift that a little bit, we're in a good space. So, but if there's venues, you know, that I would say that I like, I enjoy playing Rumors. I've always had a good working relationship with Fred. I've always had a good relationship with the engineers, past and present. You know, that's something for me that I've always felt like it's my kind of venue personally, you know, the kind of things that I look for in a venue. And this is all kind of almost all the incarnations of Rumors and the various premises that they've had. I kind of feel like where they are right now, to me, feels like the best version of them. And that's obviously a very, you know, debatable opinion, but it's my opinion, you know, and that's how I look at things, you know. And there's venues that I genuinely I missed the Mercury Live in Cape Town. Like for me, that was, I guess you could say that was a premier venue who kind of had all the kinks worked out just right. Rad side stage, rad lighting, you know, rad PA system, situated in a good place. You know, the only thing that maybe sucked about that venue for anyone who's played there are the stairs. You know, lugging gear up 2 flights of stairs is brutal, you know. And but other than that, like, I think, that's kind of where I'm at, you know. And I think, you know, the way that we do things as Lower Hollow, like I try and help the dudes in the band understand these sorts of aspects of live shows, you know, like try and look at it from what we bring to it, rather than, I don't want to point a finger at a venue because our shows sucked. Do you know what I mean? Like, it should be on us. Like, we are the band, you know, like, but sometimes, as you say, it is unavoidable. Sometimes you do find yourself in a situation. But I'll be honest, it's more than likely for us not going to happen at a venue that's got less impressive gear. It's more than likely to be something that would happen at like a more pumped up venue, if I can say it that way. You know, think of it like a car. You know, all these rad new cars, they come with a lot of tech, but there's many places for that tech to, you know, be used incorrectly or, you know, break at the worst possible time. So, you know, we just try and do what we can from our side to make sure that the show can be as good as it can be.
That attitude towards, you know, DIY attitude towards making a show happen is very, very Durban of you guys. I won't lie. So then, other than start your gear collection now, what advice do you have for musicians who are just starting to take their career seriously?
Well, that's a really good question. Look, it is a long journey for sure, you know, but fortunately now, we live in a world where resources are a click away, you know, and that's just the reality. You've got to look at band from a point of view of like, there are skills required to play the instrument. Great, fantastic, tick, we've got those. Cool, skills to write songs. Do we need those? How do we figure that part out? Okay, let's Google it, because you know what, there's tons of guys out there doing master classes on, you know, how to write songs or what makes a good song. I mean, take a guy like Rick Beato, you know, he's got a weekly podcast and he talks about all sorts of different topics, you know, when it comes to songwriting. He interviews a lot of people. They discuss things about songwriting, you know, what makes this song great, you know, or like what makes this guitar lead thing as memorable or classic, you know. So there's tons of ways to kind of educate yourself around this, but I think you've got to be willing, you know. I think that's the big thing, you know, and that's unfortunately not something that a lot of artists have. You know, a lot of people sort of who get into the music thing, they hate criticism, you know, and we're artists. So, you know, egos are involved. There's also the whole, you know, like, I don't know, my idea needs to be the idea. And, you know, like, you know, you got to hear me out, dude. And that kind of thing. there are a lot of those kinds of things, you know, that unfortunately it's par for the course in any band. You know, when you've got 5 or 6 people, or 4 people, 3 people, you know, you've got different opinions, you know. How do you marry those things together, you know? And I think for me, the way I've sort of obviously come from the old school sort of side of things, you know, and I've taken a very DIY approach since the very beginning, you know, and with that comes a lot of, you know, my dad used to say, you should steal with your eyes. And really what he was trying to say is like, just arm yourself, like look at what people are doing, like observe, be observant, you know, like, and just see how they do that thing that they do. Like try and figure out what makes that band tick. Try and figure out like how their success maybe relates to your own success, you know, like try and figure those things out. You know, don't be so up your own arse that you think that everything just works because you're the main guy and, you know, you're the mastermind behind this whole thing. And like, you know, you can easily fall off the wagon in that scenario, you know? So I would definitely say like, you know, go out there and just try and arm yourself with, you know, the educational side of what it is, you know? Also, the other thing is like a lot of bands go out there and they think, well, we write great music. And so we're going to be great. It's like, yeah, buddy, no, it doesn't work that way. Like no one gives a shit about your music when like your artwork sucks. And that's just the truth. Like I can tell you straight off the cuff that when I picked up Slipknot off a CD rack when they were still selling CDs, it was because that CD looked fucking amazing. Like it grabbed me, you know? So like, you got to look at things like that. You know, why is And Justice for All an iconic album? It's surely not because, you know, suddenly people came across the fact that there's no bass. You know, it's because the visual married up beautifully with the audio, you know, and like those things still matter. I mean, why is it a fucking thing on clothing that you can buy at Cotton On? You know what I mean? Like why are they, you know, releasing all the Metallica merch all of a sudden, you know? It's because it's cool. Because visually this band looks amazing. And I think a lot of bands kind of forget that stuff. And like what you need to do as a band, you need to kind of like over the course of whoever's in the band, you need to say like, right, what skill can you bring in? What skill can you bring in? Maybe you got a video skill and maybe you've got a graphic design skill. Maybe you can build websites and maybe you can, you know, I don't know, maybe you're more sort of like good with admin shit. Maybe you're more good with like recording shit. Maybe you're more good with writing. There's so many different levels of skill required to make a band successful because the truth is nobody has money. We live in a fucking world that's broken, you know, and we're being governed in all parts of the world by people who don't have our best interests at heart, you know? So like money is not in our favor. However, we do have the skills. We can acquire the skills we don't have. And we need to look at things from that point of view and figure out what we're missing in this puzzle. And that's where Google is amazing. That's where YouTube is amazing. That's where forums are amazing. You know, you get to read about these things. I mean, like all I am personally at the end of the day is some fucking kid who was screaming in his bedroom when I lived in Springs, the town no one fucking cares about in a shit part of Gauteng. And that's all I was. But I've gone on to do great things in my life and kind of exceeded my own expectations and gone. And I still continue to kind of have that drive. And it's because I'm constantly trying to acquire the skills that I don't have. You know, and I'm trying to apply them to the things that I care about. And I do that in a nurturing way. And hopefully some way or another, these kinds of lessons sort of rub off on people that I'm either directly working with in the projects that we're part of, or rub off on people that are exposed to the music and see what we're doing from a visual point of view and themselves are perhaps, you know, stealing with their eyes. So I would definitely say like people need to be a lot more switched on to what it is to being in a band, you know, like take your merch seriously. Like you want to make money, don't wait for the venue to pay you well because that's not easy. You know, go get your fucking merch sorted out, you know, try and figure these things out. Like, you know, even if you fail a couple of times in the beginning, like you start working these things out and it makes sense. So, you know, sorry, that was quite a long-winded thing, but I think if you could dissect it, you could probably come up with a notepad's worth of advice for people.
We are in school right now. We better be taking notes because this is gold.
That was a lecture right there.
I like it. Don't be afraid to educate yourself and don't be afraid to expand your skill sets. It's not going to sacrifice any bit of authenticity and you can still have a little bit of stardom energy, but you got to get down and do the work that's needed to be done.
100%.
Last question before we wrap up the episode. Where does Lower Hollow belong? On stage, in studio, or somewhere in between? Where do you find yourself just in your elements? Let's get answers from Ashley, then Chad, then Tristan, and then Benjamin.
I mean, I dig the studio part of things. I definitely enjoy that. Playing live is rad too. But I think I'm kind of probably more in my element during like the writing phase of figuring things out and, kind of like fine tuning what a song is going to be. Playing it live is obviously, you work towards getting that to be great live, and that's certainly, it's a fun part of it. It's like, that's the reaping the rewards side of it, I suppose. But I'm definitely a creative mind, so I lean definitely more towards that side. I'll hand over to Tristan.
So at least from my side, I've wanted to be on stage as a performer from like a really young age. And this is going back to even like probably about 12 years old, roundabout kind of thing. It's always been a really huge passion for me. I also really dig the studio aspect of things. Also, as Ash mentioned, the dissecting of everything and, problem solving, getting everything to sound 100% and perfect and everything. But yeah, definitely, I definitely enjoy the stage side of it a lot more, the actual performing. Yeah, and I mean, like rehearsals are literally my bug out time. I literally really I get into it, and it's flipping amazing. It's such a fulfilling feeling on my end. So yeah, let me hand over to Chadwick the Great.
My full name is not Chadwick, just for the record. Just would like to confirm that. It's a very good question. In terms of where Lower Hollow belongs, as cheesy and cringe as it might sound, I think Lower Hollow belongs wherever it's needed. Sorry, these guys are giving me funny looks as I'm... What I really mean is, even... This is obviously mainly focusing on the more live aspects of things. Touring and all that. If we can go play a show and one person can walk away from there feeling changed in some way, be it I don't know, finding their new favorite band or seeing how things work on stage or just taking something good away from it, I would rate that as a success. And I think Lower Hollow, at least to me, belongs in those types of environments where we can be somewhere and offer something for somebody else to take away from, if that makes sense. Yeah, again, as cheesy as that sounds, I think that's absolutely what I see Lower Hollow as in all its essence. Ben, I'll hand over to Benjamin now.
So pretty much where I feel like I belong musically, I've always loved just playing music. Like in my free time, I literally learn songs constantly. Like every week, I'm trying to learn a new song just because I love playing music. As for playing live, I have a fair bit of experience from music college, but it's not that much because it's mainly just playing to your friends and your fellow students, and it's a very comfortable space. As for playing in front of a bunch of new people and that whole side of things, I'm still kind of figuring it out. I'm not too experienced in that manner, and also recording wise, this is my first time I've been part of a proper recording process. I do my own kind of basic recording stuff on the side. Is just very rookie, if you want to say. I can't think of a better word. But yeah, it's just I'm still mainly figuring it out. The main thing I know is my belonging in music. I just want to play. That's where my passion is, I'd say.
What a solid way to end off. Ashley, Chad, Benjamin, Tristan, which track from Lower Hollow should we play out with?
I'd probably lean towards Threnody.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely feel like it's the I think it captures the heart and soul of what this has been. So, and yeah, it's a great song. We're proud about it.
Excellent. Where can people find you and get hold of your music? Give us the handles.
Oh, wow. I think it's just facebook.com/Lower Hollow. There might be an HC on that Lower Hollow. I can't remember. But Instagram is instagram.com/Lower Hollow. And we also have a website, which is lowerhollowhc.com. And you can buy merch there. You can check out tour dates and you can read up about the band and, all sorts of band things.
Dope. And for everything Sludge, visit sludgeunderground.com. You can find out the latest in local music and buy a beanie to support the show. If you need friends, join our Discord. And don't forget to give the latest Lower Hollow album some love. Guys, thank you for chatting with me and taking us through your work. It's been a total treat.
Thank you. We really appreciate that you took the time and, the questions were super cool. And yeah, you never know how these things are going to go. But I think from our side, it was a great experience. So thank you so much for taking the time to research us and, dig in properly. It's cool. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is Threnody by Lower Hollow.